There is a photograph you have seen. A man. A tank. A wide empty boulevard in Beijing. You have seen it on textbook covers, in documentary films, in lists of the most significant photographs of the 20th century. It has been called the most recognizable image of the century of protest. The man in the photograph survived. Nobody knows who he is. What the photograph does not show is everything that happened around it, the days before, the weeks of protest, the decision made by the Chinese government in the early hours of June 4, 1989, and the hours of violence that followed that decision in the streets around Tiananmen Square. The Chinese government's official position is that the military operation of June 3 and 4, 1989, was a necessary response to counter-revolutionary unrest. They have never released an official death toll. Estimates from witnesses, from declassified diplomatic cables, from the research of journalists and historians who have spent decades piecing together what happened from the accounts of people who were there, range from several hundred to several thousand. The Chinese government says it does not know the exact number. 35 years after June 4, 1989, the official account of what happened in Beijing that night remains one of the most contested and most suppressed historical questions in the world. This is the story of what the photograph does not show. The protests that culminated in Tiananmen Square did not begin on June 4, 1989. They had been building for weeks. In mid-April 1989, the death of Hu Yaobang, a reform-minded Communist Party leader who had been forced to resign in 1987, triggered an outpouring of grief and political expression that the Chinese government had not anticipated and could not easily suppress. Students from Beijing's universities gathered in Tiananmen Square to mourn Hu and to call, in the language of the time, for political reform, for greater press freedom, for dialogue between the government and the people, for accountability from the leadership that had expelled the man they were mourning. The gatherings grew. By early May, hundreds of thousands of people were gathering in Tiananmen Square, students from Beijing's elite universities, workers from factories and state enterprises, intellectuals, journalists from official Chinese media outlets who had begun covering the protests with a sympathy that their editors had not yet suppressed. Solidarity protests were occurring in cities across China: Shanghai, Chengdu, Wuhan, Xi'an. The specific moment that shifted the protests from large to extraordinary was the hunger strike. On May 13, 2 days before the Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev was scheduled to visit Beijing in what would have been the first Sino-Soviet summit in 30 years, a group of student protesters announced they would refuse food until the government agreed to dialogue. The hunger strike generated international attention on a scale that the protests had not previously achieved. Foreign media in Beijing to cover the Gorbachev visit turned their cameras and their reporting toward the square instead. Images of students collapsing, being carried to ambulances, maintaining their fast in the face of government silence, went around the world. The government could not hold the summit as planned. Gorbachev's ceremonial welcome was moved. The international embarrassment was significant and visible. The leadership, specifically Deng Xiaoping, the paramount leader whose economic reforms had transformed China across the previous decade, made a decision. The protests would end. On May 20, 1989, the Chinese government declared martial law in Beijing. The declaration did not immediately end the protests. Hundreds of thousands of people remained in the square and in the surrounding streets. Some protesters physically blocked military convoys that attempted to enter the city in the days following the declaration. The troops were stopped, temporarily, by the bodies of civilians who lay down in the road. The government waited. On the night of June 3, 1989, it moved. If this history is new to you, subscribe to Unsolved East and hit like. New episodes every week. In the early hours of June 4, 1989, the People's Liberation Army moved into Beijing. Multiple columns of troops and armored vehicles entered the city from different directions, from the west along Chang'an Avenue, from the south, from multiple points along the routes that led toward Tiananmen Square. The operation had been planned. The units deployed had been brought in from provinces outside Beijing, troops who were not from the capital and who had, in the assessment of the military planners, less connection to the protesters they would be ordered to clear. The violence did not begin at Tiananmen Square. It began in the streets leading to it. Residential neighborhoods along the routes the military took to reach the square, Muxidai, Chegingswang, Fuxingmen, were where the first and in some accounts the most significant casualties occurred. Residents who had come out to watch or to attempt to block the military advance, students moving toward or away from the square, people who were simply in the streets in the middle of a night that had started without warning, they encountered the advancing troops in the darkness. Witnesses who were present in these neighborhoods have given accounts, in interviews collected over the decades by journalists, by human rights organizations, by researchers, that describe firing into crowds, firing at buildings, firing at people who were running. The accounts are consistent in their general description and varied in their specific detail, as eyewitness accounts of chaotic and violent events are. The square itself was cleared in the early morning hours. The students remaining in Tiananmen Square, several thousand by most accounts, were given an ultimatum and a route of withdrawal. Most left. Soldiers occupied the square. The goddess of democracy, the statue that student artists had constructed and installed in the square during the protests, was destroyed. The death toll is the number that has never been established. The Chinese Red Cross initially reported approximately 2,600 deaths, a figure that was subsequently retracted under government pressure. Declassified British diplomatic cables from the time, released decades later, cited internal estimates of approximately 10,000 deaths, though historians have treated this figure with caution as potentially reflecting the higher end of uncertain estimates rather than a confirmed count. The most widely cited ranges among historians fall between several hundred and several thousand. The Chinese government's official position has varied across the decades. Early official statements described the operation as a success with minimal casualties. More recent statements have declined to provide a figure at all, describing the available information as insufficient to establish a reliable count. A government that cannot account for its own military operations casualties after 35 years is making a choice about what to account for. The aftermath. The crackdown was followed by arrests. Thousands of people across China were detained in the weeks following June 4th, workers, students, intellectuals, the participants in the protest movement and those suspected of participation were identified through the extensive surveillance apparatus of the Chinese state and through the informant networks that operate within Chinese institutions. Some were executed. Some received long prison sentences. Some fled, through Hong Kong, through underground networks that moved dissidents across borders, and became the exiled Chinese democracy movement that has maintained a presence in Western countries ever since. The man in the tank photograph was never identified. He has been the subject of extensive investigation by journalists and researchers. The Chinese government has at various times suggested he was never killed, a response to questions about his fate that did not answer the question being asked, but has not provided his identity. The most that can be said with confidence is that his fate is unknown, and that the government which could answer the question has chosen not to. The Chinese government has spent 35 years managing the memory of June 4, 1989. The management is not subtle. Within China, June 4th is not taught in schools. It is not discussed in approved media. It is not searchable on Chinese internet platforms. The date itself, written in Chinese numerals, has at various times been blocked. The phrase, Tiananmen Square Massacre, returns no results on Chinese search engines. Images associated with the protests, including the tank photograph, are blocked. Chinese citizens born after 1989 have, in many cases, grown up with no knowledge of what occurred in their capital city in the year before their birth. This is not ignorance that arrived naturally. It is ignorance that was constructed, maintained, and actively defended by the apparatus of the Chinese state across 3.5 decades. Outside China, the suppression operates differently, through diplomatic pressure, through the management of Chinese students studying abroad, through the monitoring of Chinese diaspora communities, through the specific leverage that economic relationships with China give the government over institutions and individuals who might otherwise speak more freely. The Tiananmen Mothers, a group founded by Ding Zilin, whose son was killed on June 4, 1989, have spent 35 years documenting the names of those who died. Their list currently contains 202 names. They believe the true number is vastly higher. They have been unable to document more because families fear retaliation for speaking. They have submitted petitions to the National People's Congress every year since 1989. None have been acknowledged. Ding Zilin has been surveilled, harassed, and periodically detained. She is in her 80s. She is still compiling the list. In Hong Kong, June 4th had been commemorated every year since 1989 in Victoria Park, an annual candlelight vigil that drew tens of thousands of people, and that was, for 3 decades, the largest public commemoration of the Tiananmen crackdown anywhere in the world. In 2020, the vigil was banned, initially on public health grounds related to the COVID-19 pandemic. In 2021, the organizing group, the Hong Kong Alliance in Support of Patriotic Democratic Movements of China, was dissolved under the national security law that had been imposed on Hong Kong in 2020. Its leaders were arrested. The vigil has not been held since 2019. The candles that burned in Victoria Park for 30 years are no longer lit. June 4, 1989, is simultaneously one of the most documented and least documented events in modern history. It is most documented in the sense that it occurred in front of foreign journalists, foreign diplomats, and foreign cameras that transmitted images and accounts around the world in real time. The footage exists. The photographs exist. The diplomatic cables exist, many now declassified. The accounts of survivors and witnesses, collected over decades, exist. It is least documented in the sense that the government that ordered and executed the military operation has never provided a complete account of what it did, has actively suppressed the evidence that would allow one to be constructed, and has used 35 years of institutional power to ensure that the question of what happened and how many people died remains, within China, effectively unanswerable. The result is a historical event that the world outside China knows happened, that the people inside China are systematically prevented from knowing happened, and that the government responsible for it has decided will be managed rather than reckoned with. The man in the tank photograph has never been identified. The Tiananmen Mothers have 202 names. The candles in Victoria Park have not been lit since 2019. 35 years after June 4, 1989, the Chinese government has not released an official death toll.